So for the last year and a half, I've been documenting my life using one camera. And all of the frames you're seeing now were made using that exact setup. So now you're probably wondering, what camera is that and how would you shoot that? So today I wanted to spend some time talking about my specific camera setup that I use for making cinematic vlogs, what I like, what I don't like, and whether or not I think that this is actually the right camera for you. Just a heads up, nothing in this video is sponsored or put there through paid promotion. All of these thoughts are genuinely my own, and all the gear I'm talking about today was paid for using my own hard-earned money. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and if you're interested in making this type of content, you're a solo creator making cinematic vlogs, allow me to introduce you to my good friend, my Sony a6700. So this camera officially released in July of 2023, but it wasn't until a few months later that I actually discovered that it existed. I've always been shooting on crop sensor cameras. My first camera was a Sony a6400, which is really just the baby brother of this camera. I eventually sold it to get this guy, but I ended up picking this guy up in October of 2023. And I think there was actually low stock in Canada for a little while because when I was living in Calgary, I called a lot of different camera stores and everyone basically told me this thing was on back order and I was like the 50th person to call in.
I called a few days ago asking about the Sony a6700. Do you guys have them on location right now?
I believe they're in Toronto. Let me double check.
But luckily, just with a little bit of waiting, I was able to actually get my hands on it just, I think, a day before I went on a trip. And that was really important. At the time, before I purchased this camera, I was really in a point where I wasn't making anything. I wasn't making any sort of videos, and I had kind of given up on making YouTube videos. So over that trip, I challenged myself to get familiar with this camera. Since it was really the first time I was out shooting with it, there was a lot to get used to. The new menu system, the new settings, and all the new features that this camera came with.
This is my first time riding the train in Vancouver. I'm not gonna lie. It's called the SkyTrain. I'm underground right now, a little disappointed. And I am not lying when I say this, but having this camera during that trip genuinely reinvigorated and reignited that creative spark within me. We're back on UBC campus now, and we're heading down to Wreck Beach, and gonna go watch the sunset. We're out here. This is the ocean. Which brings me to my first reason why this was the perfect camera for me: color grading.
It wasn't until I sat down after with the footage from that trip that I was able to get a look out of a camera that I've never been able to do and actually be proud of my color grading. I had played around previously with some flatter log profiles, but never really shot with a true 10-bit log profile. And if that sounds too technical for you, that's okay. It's basically just like a very flat looking image that I can go in and tweak all the colors, maximize my dynamic range. And if you're kind of new to the camera space in the last few years, you might not think that that's anything crazy, but like 4 to 5 years ago, the idea of having a flat log 10-bit color profile in like a consumer level camera was just not a thing. You had to put down a lot of dollars in order to get that feature, but nowadays, even my iPhone can do it. I've dedicated multiple videos on this channel to color grading, so I'm not gonna go too deep into it, but the point being that it wasn't until I got my hands on this camera and shot an S-Log3 that I felt that I actually understood color grading and had my footage looking like what I wanted it to look like. So this right here is the setup. It really is just a camera, 2 lenses, and a microphone. Now the camera right now looks a little bit different, and that's just because I have a cage on it. I run 2 lenses, one ultra wide for vlogging, which is the small guy you see there, and one larger one, which is a zoom lens 17-70, which I use for more cinematic shots. If I'm shooting anything that needs to be a little bit more punched in, I'll use this one. I'd say the split is about 90% on my wide 11mm vlogging lens. That's really what you guys see the most often on this channel, and the other 10% of the time I'll be using the zoom lens. I'm also plugging in a microphone, which is the Rode Video Micro. The audio equipment I actually use changes depending on what I'm shooting, but just for demonstration, I put on my classic vlogging setup. And what's crazy is that this entire setup actually fits all within my 6-liter bag with room to spare. Which really just brings me to my next point on why this was the perfect camera for me, which is the size and convenience of it all. So if you can't tell by now, this is not a technical review where I'm diving into all of the specs and details of this camera, but more so of a user experience review. I know in the beginning when you're purchasing something, it's super easy to obsess over small details. Does it have slow motion, time-lapse, 4K, 6K, 8K, all of that stuff. But after you use the camera for a long period of time, those things kind of fade away, and all you remember and actually know about the camera is how you interact with it. What I actually get to experience is the size of the camera, the weight of the camera in my hand. So because of all of that, having a small camera that just allows me to shoot very conveniently is so important. So just to bring up a common example, sometimes when I'm out at a coffee shop or getting dinner,
you don't have that much space on the table to put all of your stuff, let's say the food plus the camera. And if I had a large full frame camera, chances are that there probably wouldn't be space for me to set up the tripod and get that shot, meaning that in that scenario, that camera was the wrong camera for that situation. And like I mentioned, a lot of days when I'm out traveling doing solo shoots, all of my filmmaking gear fits in a 6-liter sling bag. And that's just something that you definitely cannot do with a more professional, maybe full frame camera. Yes, maybe the image looks like 4% better and you get one more stop of dynamic range, but again, when you're out shooting, those aren't things that you can actually experience. What you actually get to experience is the size of the camera, the weight of the camera, the accessibility and convenience, and those types of things. So just a few things that I wanted to bring up that I think are worth considering before you purchase this camera, and even though these don't technically classify as cons, I think they're good to mention. Number one, like a lot of consumer cameras these days that pack in a lot of professional features, this camera has a slight overheating problem. As in, it has overheated on me a few times, but I will also say that the times it has overheated were times when I was shooting continuously for over an hour and a half. But in regular everyday use, even while vlogging, while traveling outside in the sun, this thing has never overheated on me. And that's because I typically shoot in small bursts, so that's small 30-second clips, and even the longest talking segments I'll typically put in my vlog are no more than 5 minutes. So if your shooting style aligns with that and you're never really recording for over 10 minutes at a time, I don't think you'll ever run into any overheating problems with this, but it's definitely worth mentioning if you're getting into more professional work. Second is the low light performance. Now, I've never actually had any issue with the low light performance because I do not pixel peep. I don't actually care if there's a little bit of grain in my image because, to be honest, a lot of people add grain into their footage afterwards anyways, so what's the point if you just have a little bit built in? But this camera does not have that amazing low light sensor that the FX3 or A7S III has, where you can shoot up to 12,800 ISO with clean noise. I've vlogged in very dark scenarios when I'm outside past sunset, blue hour, even into the late night, and I just crank the ISO. I've gotten usable footage up to 12,800 ISO in very, very dark conditions. But again, for shooting nighttime cinematics, I've never really had a problem. I will not say that there is no grain because there definitely is and there's some distortion, but it's so minimal and a lot of people just watch YouTube on their phones and aren't pixel peeping at that quality anyways, so I don't really ever think about that. So again, the things I listed aren't really cons, but they're just good to know in case that you fall into that very, very niche category where you cannot have those things happening. So is this camera the perfect camera for you and the only one you'll ever need? Well, chances are probably not. And the truth is the answer to that question is always going to depend on yourself and what you're doing. If you are a working professional in this space, I would probably say no. I would definitely look at the FX30, the FX3, or maybe like an A7 series, anything with like a dual SD card slot and also maybe the internal fan so you can do super long talking head segments. If you're a beginner, then slightly more so, I do see a case where this would be the perfect beginner camera. The only thing holding it back would be the price. It is still like a large investment to put down. If you're a beginner, you might not be so sure how much you want to spend. I do think it's an amazing pickup and it would last you a very long time throughout your career. But again, I always tell people that iPhones shoot such amazing video right now. If you're still unsure, I would start with this. After a month or two, consider whether you want to drop like a couple thousand into a camera and lens setup.
So then who is this camera actually for? Who should be buying this camera in 2025? Well, like I said, I think it comes down to what you're shooting, and I think this camera really excels for people who are shooting content similar to what I do. And that's kind of a terrible explanation, but give me a second to explain. If you are a shooter and you find that you're typically traveling alone, you want to move fast, you want to move quick, you don't really want to draw attention to yourself, but you're looking for quality that stands out, that looks a little sharper, a little cleaner, and maybe a little bit more creative than a cell phone. A camera like this is exactly what you should be looking for. Gives you all the benefits of using an actual camera versus using your phone, like being able to change lenses, put filters on there, attach audio equipment, while also not taking you out of the moment and making it super difficult and cumbersome to set up. So shooting on Sony, you know that the autofocus is good and the footage is going to look good, which really just makes my job as a solo cinematic vlogger so easy. I don't think majority of people need full frame cameras as much as they think they might, and for almost every single use case that I found myself in over this last year, just casually documenting my life, this camera has been perfect and has been able to do it all. So if you are a content creator looking to get into this more creative storytelling, cinematic vlogging stuff, I do still think that this might be the perfect camera for you.